what's the use of two strong legs if you only run away? And what use is the finest voice when you've nothing good to say? What good is strength and muscle if you only push and shove? And what's the use of two good ears when you can't hear those you love? It's not just what you're born with, it's what you choose to bear. And it's not how big your share is, but how much you can share. And it's not the fights you dreamed of, but those you really fought. It's not what you've been given, it's what you do with what you've got. Yeah, it's not just what you're born with, it's what you choose to bear. And it's not how big your share is, but how much you can share. And it's not the fights you dreamed of, but those you really fought. It's not what you've been given, it's what you do with what you've got.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to Seeds of Revolution. We've got a great episode for you today. We have Dr. Shamma Boyarin, who is a professor at University of Victoria, and he's teaching a really interesting class this semester called Liberation Through Anarchy, a Religious Exploration. And joining us with Dr. Boyarin are three students in that class, Ryan, Luke, and Chasida, who are going to talk to us about what the class is all about, what they're learning, and hopefully how the confluence of religion and anarchism has changed their perspective, added their perspective, made them think about their perspectives a little bit differently. So Dr. Boyarin and Chasida and Luke and Ryan, welcome to Seeds of Revolution. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Joel, for creating this space for us to talk about the course, which I think all of us are really enjoying and want to share with the world what we're experiencing, and invite people to follow along a little bit.
Fantastic. Right off the bat, let's get started. Maybe you could tell our listeners a little bit about what the class is all about, what your idea was behind offering this class, what you hope students and other people get out of this class, sort of how their orientations may or may not be changing, or how their minds may or may not be expanding after they take this class with you.
Yeah, so real briefly, I've been teaching at UVic for over 16 years, and part of like the blessing and curse of my career at UVic has been that there hasn't been a defined kind of place where my academic background really fit. So I've always had to be inventing courses to teach, which allows me a lot of flexibility and freedom, where if I get excited about something and I can put it in the language of a course that my peers, my colleagues see as relevant, I get to teach it. So over the years, I've taught courses on pop culture and religion, heavy metal and religion. And when it came to this class, I've been in the past couple of years being more and more excited about anarchism as an idea and as a way of life, and wanting to explore that with students. And so I had this ready-made framework of thinking about topics and religion, and I could just kind of fit that kind of paradigm. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is what brought me to anarchism is thinking about Jewish anarchists and Jewish anarchism. So taking my intellectual kind of curiosity and this pre-made box of how I've been kind of developing courses for UVic, it was really easy to sort of put it into that kind of clothing. So that was the initial. And then I really like exploring with students things that I don't feel like I'm an expert on, but having these conversations with them, and anarchism especially works well with that as a mode of inquiry, where it's not about, here, let me kind of lecture at you about but rather let's read these texts together and kind of see what we think about them. And that also really works with Jewish way of learning. So that's kind of the core of the course.
Chasida and Luke and Ryan, what brought you to the class?
Yeah, I can go ahead. I think anarchism, you know, mainstream anarchism traditionally has been quite secular. And as an agnostic person, I felt like we've always been unnecessarily siloing off so much possibility and so many entry points into ways of living that are more communal and anti-hierarchical. So for me, it was like a natural fit. It was like, oh my god, I wanted to. Oh my gosh, I want to take this course. That's me. I want to hear you guys.
I mean, for me, it boils down to like I Jewish and I'm religious and I have kind of a lot of frustrations with the tension between religion and anarchy and how it's often posited as like two completely separate things. And Shama and I have just had a lot of discussions about the ways that religion is a little bit hidden inside of anarchism, and so like yeah, the I jumped to take this course basically.
Ryan, what about you?
Yeah, when you mentioned like your question having like the pedagogical aspect, having taken a few classes with Shama in the past, I had a feeling that there would be a kind of experiential component to like community working. And I think that's totally been realized in the class, like not just through group work, but also in the way people show up in the seminar format that I think has really been significantly more reciprocal with other students and like participatory than a lot of seminars can be. Not to say that other seminars are bad, but there could be so many examples. And I hope, Luke, you don't mind. I like uh, use an example of the way Luke brings in stuff to seminar made from home, different like posters and stickers that can become like items of like strong memory, like ongoing like items and artifacts, even to kind of remember the course and keep the memories of the course lasting. Like if I were to keep some of those stickers or posters. So there's an experiential communal part that I've really appreciated. And I mostly just took the class as I saw Shama was the prop, honestly. Like, Shama's a great prop, great, facilitator. With the kind of experiential component of the course, I had a feeling that would be something that's going to happen because of just the theme of anarchy happening in a university was like, okay, it's going to be a different format or, as you asked, like a different pedagogy. And I think that's totally been the case. And students are bringing input and participation that's really significant. And, I'm learning so much from the input of students that's not just verbal, but the way of participating. And again, Luke, I'm going to bring your stuff into this. Like Luke keeps bringing in really awesome stickers and posters that are made at home and then that have like iconography on them that mean a lot already, but they going forward can be like kept. And yeah, I'm finding like a lot of strong experience and meaning that goes far beyond the usual relation with university courses. Yeah, I really wasn't so interested in even the anarchy. In fact, like the anarchy part maybe wasn't what almost kind of deterred me because I was like, what? Like at university? Like what? And I don't know. I just had courses with Shama, and I know that was really what got me to want to take the class, having taken two courses before with Shama. And I think that he's a great facilitator, and that was kind of my reason for joining.
Chasida, you said something very interesting. You were talking about the tensions between religion and anarchy, and I was hoping maybe you or Dr. Boyar and others might want to expand on that, because I think that is certainly an assumption that a lot of other people have, is that there is this inherent tension between the two concepts and never the twain shall mix, or maybe they shouldn't mix.
Shama, do you want to speak on this a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, both on a kind of a very popular level, both within anarchism and kind of for people outside and people who think about Marxism and socialism more broadly. We all have heard like, religion is the opiate of the masses, and and a focus on material dialectism as a central transformation, and how important that is for radical leftist liberatory movements. And for a lot of people, that means a complete rejection of all forms of religion, all forms of faith as being superstition, unscientific, and so on and so forth. And what this course is based is on sort of taking that assumption and taking a broader assumption that, modern Western society has, moved towards secularism, and that in Canada we're, a progressive, which means secular society, and kind of interrogating that through the example of religious anarchism, and asking probing questions about the nature of religion and secularism, and what do people mean when they say, religion is the opiate of the masses, and how does somebody like a Martin Buber, for example, approach spirituality as the center of what he thinks is anarchist relations, and then taking that both in a very niche way of thinking about anarchism, but also more broadly in other ways of spirituality and stuff like that.
Chasida, Luke, Ryan, can you talk a little bit about what you see are or are not the tensions between religion and anarchy?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we want to trace anarchism back to Europe and Proudhon and Bakunin and those guys, I think there are very strong reasons for an atheist anarchism at that time, when you have religious institutions dominating a lot of life, and that line between church and state is basically non-existent. There are very good reasons at that time to reject religion as an institutionalized form of oppression. But I think when we zoom out, I mean, even now, like, I think that line is not as blurry anymore. And I think anarchists are here, I'm gonna say here, are very quick to take that without a grain of salt now and apply it to the 21st century. And I'm not confident that we're living in that same world anymore. And if you want to, and there's a lot of debate about that, right? Like, even if you go back further, Ursula Le Guin says, well, anarchism started with the Tao, you know, in Asia. So I think the trend towards atheism, like, yes, it's a lot of heavy relying on like the left and Marx, but the anarchist atheist response, I think, came out of a very real oppression that is a lot more dynamic now. And you don't necessarily have the same amount of religious control, or rather hierarchy, and proprietarians using religion as a shield to be oppressive the way you did so universally at the time that Bakunin and Gon and those guys were writing.
Can I jump in real quick and also add one of the things that I was thinking about as I was putting the course together, and became even a stronger theme as we're going through the material together? Anarchism makes a claim to be something that exists pre its theorizing in the, let's say, 19th century, and a kind of something that's broader than just its European articulation. And to substantiate that, even those anarchist theorists looked at older and different places to find anarchism. And often those places are religious groups. Early Christianity is an example. Luke mentioned Taoism. So by its very nature, anarchism has already been making claims of being intertwined in religion. So, and what we're finding is that there are these strong tendencies in various religious communities that not per se a religion is anarchist, but that there are, statements that Jesus is making that are anti-statist and anti-hierarchy that you can use, and that there's something really powerful about connecting to those older traditions in ways that are, and also enriching our spiritual lives through it as well. So this kind of idea that anarchism is in its very nature anti-religion has never been really true. It's one of the things that we're finding.
Chasida?
On the like moving away from the like historical piece for a moment, just like the lived experience of being somebody who is religious and is also interacting with anarchists and like leftist spaces, and like, I say that in heavy quotations. It sometimes there is just a baseline assumption that religiosity is not there, or that religiosity is like something that we have, like, if we were religious, given up in order to kind of engage in in activism, anarchist thought, whatever it may be. And that is just so deeply frustrating because, at least personally for me, the like my religiosity, my like Judaism is like fundamentally linked to my anarchism in the way that I like my ethics and my values and my morals are linked to that. And so it's really, really refreshing and great to be in a room full of people that are actually engaging with that aspect without just casting it aside, I guess.
I'm curious how, playing devil's advocate for a moment, I'm curious how you all have navigated both academically as well as politically the very common idea that I think many of us have experienced throughout our lives of both activism and religion, which is a theory which, quite frankly, in my opinion, is supported by some history, significant history, that organized religion by and large has served more as a tool of oppression rather than liberation. And I specifically say organized for a purpose, and how that has interacted with your study of liberation through anarchy. And looking back at history, if we see religion as more often than not a tool of oppression, how do we change that, or how do we incorporate that into more liberatory ideas? Understanding that there have been individuals who have combined the two, but it seems like historically the institutions certainly have used one to, suppress the other.
Just not yesterday, our last class. Oh yeah, it was yesterday. Our cohort made a great point about how religion is happening. People identify as religious either way, and it's mobilizing. You know, it's something that we have to reckon with, and whether it's more oppressive or not, either way, there is a necessity to engage and recall, if not emphasize. If there's a core of a religion that is, very ethically grounded and not statist and, grassroots, then that is good to emphasize. And we see that is historical. And yeah, religions operating either way, and and the administration element and the institutionalized elements need to be, crowded out, I think, in the way that we engage religion.
Adding on to that a little bit, like, religion is happening either way, and because, religion is a social function, and looking at, like, there is a plethora of things that states and, like, people in power have used as a tool for oppression, right? Healthcare, for instance, right, is often weaponized against all sorts of people across time. And so the idea that religion is like fundamentally a uniquely oppressive idea really falls flat for me when looking at the broader context of every other social function that the state also uses to kind of ruin people's lives. And religion is so tied up in cultural expression and lineage as well. Like, to throw all of that away is comes at a price, right? Yeah.
I'll say that, but from my perspective, and I think this is true for many of the students on this recording today and many in the class in various ways. We all, many of us identify as people who've experienced that kind of oppression by institutionalized, organized religion. So for me personally, I grew up Jewish and in a Jewish family and with a strong connection to Jewish tradition. But throughout my life, I felt that rejection by institutionalized religion. I don't want to go at length because we have other things to talk about, but I don't feel welcome and can't participate in any of the synagogues here in Victoria. And for a long time, I felt myself without a religious community, even though feeling strongly tied to my tradition, teaching about it, viewing the world through it. And it is only through meeting other people who identified as religious anarchists, Jewish anarchists, reading about the history of Jewish anarchism, and people who kind of are looking and talking about anarchism in a spiritual way, whether they're Jewish or not, that I found a place that I was like, oh, there's people in the world who have the same experience of oppression, but also view liberation through religion and not through rejecting religion. So yes, absolutely, all of these problems are real, but they're precisely the problem that anarchism is here to critique: institution, hierarchy, power, and the challenges that anarchism faces in creating communities that are loving and non-hierarchical are also faced by religious anarchists. How do we create community? How do we create community that can express our religious identity without being, we are the chosen one and all those who aren't are bad, and ways in which we can also kind of participate in other religious traditions that aren't our own, and all these things I think are deeply anarchist questions that, so in adding the religious aspect might make it a little bit more complicated, but it's precisely the challenge of anarchism for me.
There's a distinction that I make, and I readily admit this could be a distinction or not a difference. And so please tell me if it is. But in my mind, the distinction that I make is that anarchism and liberation is very compatible with and may even be aided by spirituality, but not necessarily compatible with and oftentimes opposed by religion. Is that a meaningful distinction? Is that me being a pedant? Or does that carry some weight with you all and in your studies as well?
I mean, Shema, do you want to talk a little bit about the spiritual, not religious conversation that happened in our
Yeah.
class?
Yeah. I mean, I'll do this really briefly and I'll frame this in two ways. First of all, from a scholarly perspective, and this is part of where this class intersects with my scholarly interest, with the interest of the program that it's run under, which is the Religion, Culture, and Society program. Scholars are asking, real questions about what is religion and what do we define as religion? When has this category that we call religion come to be, and who gets to decide what are religious things and what are spiritual and what are secular and all these things? And through troubling of these categories, precisely the question that you're asking, Joel, is also a scholarly pursuit. So what is the difference between dogma and like institutionalized religion and somebody going to do yoga in a forest, and so on and so forth? So on the one hand, so yes, these are absolutely meaningful questions, and these are questions that people write books and have full careers around. But then on a personal level, one of the things that we talked about, particularly in the last week when we talked about contemporary Jewish anarchism, was the need for spirituality in anarchist spaces for people who aren't necessarily religious, and how do those things manifest, and various ways in which people have developed anarchist ritual that's spiritual to them and isn't necessarily coming from Judaism or Christianity and other things like that.
I'm sure that this could be its own episode or multiple episodes, but I just want to say, like, even my Anishinaabe comrade in the room right now listening is like, yeah, man, like my like native spirituality is seen as being in conflict with the secular anarchism, and it ain't.
but can I just jump in on that and say one of the troubling things that I have really interesting conversations with indigenous colleagues and is in the language is, do we call indigenous practices religious? What is the violence that is done by taking certain practices and saying, oh, they're just like Protestant Christianity or just like Judaism, versus saying, no, these practices are legitimate, whether they are religious in the same way that European Westerners called religion or not. So there's a whole separate complicated things where anarchists might say, oh yeah, these Anishinaabe practices, they are aligned with anarchism because they're not religion, because they're not the state, the church, because they're not Protestantism. So it becomes a circular, complicated conversation, which I think is very productive and interesting.
And in part, productive and interesting, and also really central to the course material, which is fundamentally we're troubling, really, at least in my mind, like what religion is in a lot of ways and how we can define that. And so I really empathize with empathize isn't quite the right word. I can't think of the right word though. I really empathize with the distinction between the spiritual and the religious, and not kind of seeing spirituality as something that can be in alignment with anarchism, and seeing religiosity as something that can't be in alignment with anarchism. But I really struggle with that concept because it seems to really flatten some like structures and cultural expressions that have, that are in place and that are not like institutional or state run.
And some folks might not feel welcome to just readily enter the religious worship space that they haven't been a part of in the past, or as Shamma has shared, have been a part of and can no longer be. And I think spiritual is a kind of a idea, an assemblage that can be kind of talked about. Yeah, also because some people might not be able to enter religious worship in religious communities, especially those capital urban like Abrahamic, being welcome or
So another question I had, and I don't want to come across as too interrogatory because that is certainly not my mission. But it's very rare that I get a chance to talk to people who are interrogating the confluence of religion and anarchy, and I just find it fascinating. What is the response, if one is even needed, to people like me who very much have a bias and think of the what I foresee as an inherently supernatural aspect to whether it is religion or spirituality, and that as a part of that supernatural belief, it is inherently hierarchical. We are investing whatever we call. We are investing Jesus, Allah, Yahweh, the moon, the moon goddess, whatever it is, we are investing them inherently with this position of authority over creatures that do not share that same celestial plane, and that built into conceptions of both religion and spirituality is this idea of hierarchy. And that idea of hierarchy is so often inimical to concepts of anarchy and concepts of political liberation here on Earth.
This might seem like a cop-out, but one of the things that we're really discovering in the course, and it's it's a UVic course, so it feels very short even for us that we're kind of looking at it closely. But a lot of so we've focused a lot on Judaism, but we've also looked this week at specifically Christianity and Islam, and next week we're going to look at a little bit at Taoism. And there's a lot of diversity in these religions in how the relationship to the divine is conceptualized. I know a lot of us have grown up imagining, particularly in the Abrahamic religions, the monastic religions, of God as being this like, white bearded guy who looks maybe like an older version of me, perhaps not with purple hair and painted nails, but
That's
uh,
the that's the fun version. That's the fun
yeah.
version of God.
But but in many of these religions, and separate even from anarchism, a lot of the way the divine is conceptualized would it be in a way that's very abstract and very beyond any gender or material being. And that doesn't lend itself to that kind of notion of hierarchy. That lends itself much more to a broader sense of kind of the grounding. So I'm thinking specifically because we just this past week we were looking very closely at Christian anarchists' answer to that question. And basically for a lot of them, the divine is the grounding for that kind of utopian collective liberation that anarchists imagine, that what God, you know, submitting to God means living that ideal of anarchism where everybody gets to, develop themselves and develop themselves in love with each other. And so when Christians say Jesus is love, and Christian anarchists say Jesus is love, they mean it in a very anarchist sense. So that's one thing. So religion is a very diverse thing. And the other thing is to remember that anarchism as a theory is also very diverse. And what anarchism has said about hierarchy and how that manifests, and what anarchism has said about collective liberation and how to achieve it is very, complicated. So when you mesh those two things and allow for a much more complex theorizing of anarchist collective liberation, there's a whole richness of ways in which that question can be answered. So I think, yes, there are aspects to religion that do lend themselves very much to hierarchy. And if we imagine God in a very simplistic way, we end up with a hierarchy of God who can then appoints representatives of earth on earth that then we then have to listen to choose the right. But I don't think that all religion and all religious societies have thought of it that way.
Luke, Chasida, Ryan, did you want to chime in on this point?
I'll give it a shot. I think that having supernatural or kind of ineffable experiences, for me personally, do not evoke a hierarchical relation with divinity or with God, but kind of the opposite. Without theorizing on immanence, it's ineffable, so I can't describe it. And that brings me a kind of joy, laughter, because it's so inexplainable. But even though I can't understand what's going on, there's a lot of meaning to what might happen. So just for example, like if I took those posters and stickers that Luke has given us and I put them between my house and school, and I pass them every day, and I imbue them with meaning and memory. Over time, they start to imbue me back. And these are just items, right? Everyday things, or a piece of clothing or something can bring really ineffable experiences that seem to me to be likenable to divinity without being too presumptuous. I just really enjoy the joy that comes with not understanding a certain very complex relation with memory and artifacts and just loving relations generally.
As another fellow Jew who was raised religious, looking at your readings, there's one in particular, well, there's many in particular that strike my interest. One of them was, what is Jewish about Jewish anarchism? And as a Jewish anarchist, I would love to hear some answers to that question and what that reading and what the discussion around that reading illuminated for you all.
I'd really like to hear what the students have to say about it first.
Well, then I'm calling on him. Luke, please. You have two UVic professors in this Zoom call, so when all else fails, we will call on you. So Luke, you're first, and then I'll call on the rest of you.
I also want to say, and Joel, please leave this in the recording, that I made an agreement with the students that this will air after the course is done, so nobody has to feel put on the spot to give the correct answer. Nobody's final grade is riding on what they say right now or anything.
I will just note for the record that this reading was from week 4, January 22nd. So I feel like this is fair game.
I mean, not to speak to the reading specifically, but rather to just like that reading as well as just a totality of things that we've been discussing in class. What is Jewish about Jewish anarchism is like the most complicated and also like the most simple question in the world, because the there are people who identify as Jewish and anarchists, and there are people who identify as Jewish anarchists, and there are people who don't really identify as anarchists at all, but are very Jewish in their ideas, or are anarchists, oh my god, but are who don't identify with anarchism at all, but are very anarchist in the way that they express their ideas. And it's hard not to like inject my own personal like feelings into this conversation, but
Do it. Do it. Inject those feelings.
I thank you, Luke. I I just at this point in the course and at this point in engaging with the material about what is an anarchist, what isn't an anarchist, do they factor in their Judaism personally, or is that just something that you can kind of see as a line through people's work? Is an important question.
Go for it, Luke.
Okay. Yeah, I think that I'm trying to like put myself in the boots of the rhinestone boots of Luke from 5 years ago, and like imagine myself as an audience member, and then how frustrated I would be at the intangibleness of like what our response is to some of these questions, because I think even anarchists struggle with like what with all agreeing on what is anarchism. Never mind a bunch of religious or spiritual anarchists.
Well, let me narrow it down. 'Cause I don't think we need to worry about what we need to do to speak for the anarchist community and the historical record. So let's maybe make it a little easier, and maybe perhaps a little bit more vulnerable, but a little bit easier. So Luke, for you, Chasida, for you, and Ryan as well, for you, what is Jewish about Jewish anarchism? Don't worry about what the anarchists of the past think. Don't worry about what the great Jews of the past think. I'm not quite frankly interested in what they think. They're all dead. For you personally, what do you think is Jewish about anarchism on a day-to-day level for the way you walk through the world?
I mean,
And you don't have to don't cite anybody. Who gives a shit what Bakunin said? He's
True.
dead. He doesn't care what we think about him anyway.
Totally. I mean, yeah, I think like I'm not a Jewish person. It's I got to keep that in mind. But what I what I observe from the Jewish anarchist community that I am so luckily adjacent to here is this very embodied understanding that God, like that Hashem, is all of us, and that is reified in how we gather and how we interact and how we speak with one another and our rituals. And I think I want to challenge the whatever secular anarchist position that is so quick to do away with this, and as if secular anarchists don't have their own rituals, as if we don't have the black bloc, as if we don't have martyrdom and 1,000 pictures of the Haymarket aid, every year, like May Day, like these things are book fairs. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. Like I think, yeah, at least for me, Jewish anarchism, what is Jewish about Jewish anarchism is a real focus on ritual and procedure, and this very deep, again, my understanding of Jewishness is like this very deep always questioning, and there's never like a finite, stone. Like it's always moving, and I think that makes, Jewishness like very compatible with anarchism.
Chasida, what about you again, on a personal level? We're not worrying about all the other people out there. For you, what is Jewish about Jewish anarchism?
I mean, fundamentally, I just don't know how I would be able to engage with r religious texts, like Jewish religious texts, and not come out of that with, or I guess not even come out of that because it's a constant engagement, right? But, like, not come out of that with the idea that we need to make a better world for people and that it is our responsibility to do so, all like, and that is life,
Mhm.
right? For me, m my anarchism is Jewish because it's tied up in that. It's tied up in ideas of, for instance, like, it's just it is so you're right, Luke. You're right, Luke, about thinking about your past self who would be really frustrated with the intangibility of a lot of the things that we're saying, right? It's just that I fundamentally don't know how I wouldn't be Jewish and not be an anarchist, or I don't fundamentally know how I could engage with the world in any other way. Like, that's so deep in my core, I don't even have very good words for it.
Ryan, what about you? What do you find Jewish about Jewish anarchism?
I just loved those last two answers so much. For me, I think three things. First, that I understand synagogue to be something that is not determined by like a very collectively recognized worship center with, rather expensive architectural design, but can be a portable thing that can happen anywhere. So that is reminding me of a parallel in anarchism of like grassroots organizing and the ability to empower spaces heterogeneously or like, at your own volition. So yeah, that idea of synagogue, which maybe not everybody shares. Also, I might lean a little bit on the readings, honestly, but so the idea that salvation, redemption, or utopia is to occur here on earth, in contrast to maybe a Christian cosmology that has salvation or utopia or redemption happening in heaven, like beyond earth, particularly Messianic Judaism, that this is the third thing I think, that the Messiah is not an individual who comes as a historical event, but is something, think I'm quoting Buber right now or in the Lowy reading, that is being prepared in history. So that's the third thing, is like the idea of time really has future and the past enfolding into each other. And if that doesn't make sense, then I think I'm actually doing a good job of explaining it, because it probably doesn't, it can't be, rationalized. But yeah, so time, synagogue, and whatever that second thing I said was, yeah, salvation occurring here on earth. Yeah.
I guess for me, one of the core things about Jewish anarchism in its many variations is that, as all anarchism is anti state, Jewish anarchism makes an explicit statement that not only can Jews be Jews without the state of Israel, we see the state of Israel as inhibiting our full potential as Jews. That the elimination of the state of Israel is first and foremost the goal of Palestinian liberation, of course, but it is also necessary for Jewish liberation.
What is something, for the three of you, and Shama, you as well, for the four of you, what is something that has been the most surprising to you about your exploration of religion and anarchism? Maybe it's a preconceived notion that was weakened. Maybe it was a belief that you never thought you would adopt that all of a sudden you're now reconsidering. But just tell me something, tell our listeners, more importantly, something about this class and this path that you've been on the last couple of weeks in class that has, I don't want to say changed how you feel because it sounds so schmaltzy, but has surprised you?
I got a good schmaltzy answer, I think, for that. That
Go
I
for
think
it.
will be different from Luke, because I think I was skeptical of anarchism. Maybe again with our past self, maybe 10 years ago, I would have been like, oh yeah, I'm going in it for the anarchism and the religion. But for this time, I was having a bit of a taste of anarchism more recently that was too patriarchal and Eurocentric, and I was totally presumptuous about, or quite presumptuous about, what anarchism was. So I'm so much more opened up to anarchism, whereas I was coming to the class for the religiosity. Yeah. But I'm so, yeah, now changed in my feelings about how anarchism is so internally variable. That makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, Ryan, to hear you say that is so interesting because for me, I'm like, well, sorry guys, but for me, I'm like, the anarchism comes first. But oh, there's religious anarchists. Like, holy fuck! Like, I want to do that. It's been a funny experience because it's RCS 310, right? Like religious and cultural studies. Like, so I would say most of my classmates are like religious scholars, which is just it's a very unique experience to be in a room where you're talking about religious anarchism and you're an anarchist, and then most of the other people are religious scholars but not anarchists. Like it's such an interesting confluence. So I appreciate that anecdote, Ryan, because I feel like I came out of it from the other side, in and out. Yeah.
Chasida, what about you?
I think like even just like coincidentally building on a little bit of that, one of the more like surprising or maybe just like exciting things for me about this class has been being in a room full of people that are like willing to engage with like religious scholarship and like so just like so earnestly, because that's not something that I always get to do in my day-to-day life. It's just been such like a a a joy to see that other people who also enjoy engaging with these concepts. And also the other like exciting, surprising sort of thing for me has really been the course materials that we've looked at that are like doing this kind of tying back storying of anarchism as like reading back into Torah and reading back into the older religious texts, because that's like that's what I do, you know? That's how I think. That's it's just it's really refreshing to be able to actually engage with material and with people's ideas and thoughts that are like in engaging in tradition of like connection over time in a way that in non-anarchist Jewish spaces don't really do, and non-Jewish anarchist spaces don't really do. Yeah.
Shema, what about you? Because I know, even I can teach the same class, and I have taught the same class now for 12, 13 years. And yet every semester, something surprises me. Even if it's the same material, I learn something new. My students teach me something new. I approach the material in a different way. What has your experience been with this class that has been the most unique?
So I want to say a couple of things. First of all, this class has been a real leap of faith for me. Like, I told the students early that the format will be a little bit looser and that it will require a lot of buy-in from them to make it work. That is, they have to come, engaged and prepared to be in kind of a place of discomfort where we're not going to end up with concrete, answers and have discussions like this for hours and yet still remain kind of part of it and engage, and to try to also be with each other in a different way. It's still a classroom, it's still a UVic class, but still try to sort of embody a community of learners that where we get to kind of in the 3 hours a week that we're together, kind of try to be slightly different. And the buy-in from students and the payoff for setting up that and kind of continuing it and holding ourselves to a bit of a different way of being has been so positive and so affirming. So it's not surprised in the sense that I was expected to be disappointed, but I didn't know if it would actually play out that way. So it's been really, and part of me is thinking as it's coming to, is this a one-off thing? How do I sort of like take this experience and try to recreate it in other classes and so on and so forth? But that's a separate thing. I'm trying also to just enjoy it for what it is. The second thing I really want to make explicit, and I've said this to students in various ways, my goal in the class, I mean, I teach classes on, introduction to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And when I'm teaching those classes, my goal isn't to make students Jews, Christians, and Muslims, which would be ridiculous in one class to be like, you have to become. And similarly, my goal in this class wasn't to necessarily convert people to anarchism or to convert people to Jewish anarchism or religious anarchism or to convince them that one way, but to show them what the questions, and some of the questions that we raised today are precisely those questions that religious anarchists, that anarchists struggle with, why those questions are vital, and to provide them with tools to struggle with those same questions and to empower them in the class and post the class to sort of see them as meaningful things that they can take action on in their lives in ways that it might be aligned with what the anarchists kind of think or other ways, but my real desire is for them to sort of see that, questioning hierarchy, questioning how the world is, questioning capitalism are things that people have been doing and have been coming up with alternatives and to sort of think about and maybe all capitalism is fine, but to have these questions. So, and yeah, and I'm really actually kind of happy that you got to see the inconcreteness of it, because that's part of it is that, and to spend 3 hours a week, in a space where you're not given, this is what Judaism says, and this is what Christianity is, or this is what anarchism is defined as, can be really, really hard for students. But to sort of encourage them that's actually a really, really good place to be in is, I think, really important from a pedagogical standpoint, if not an anarchist one.
So we are running a little bit over an hour, so I did want to wrap up with a last question, which, Shamma, I think you gave me a perfect introduction for. In the spirit of this class and the spirit of exploration and not necessarily obsessing over the concrete, what is one question, not one answer, not one conclusion, but what is a question that you think you will come away from this class asking that will be really formative for you going forward? You'll have no idea what the answer is, but the question is going to be there.
I have been wondering and thinking a lot about how just other cultural expressions and religious expressions can be, how those cultural expressions can be like how anarchism can be intertwined into them, and how it can be storied in the way that we're talking about, in a similar way to how we're talking about Jewish texts and Jewish traditions. I just There's a whole world out there of people who have all sorts of different traditions and inclinations and ideas about the world that are coming to conclusions that you can call anarchist conclusions. And I'm really fascinated to learn more about how what those are and how other people have kind of gotten there. Yeah.
Luke, Ryan, what's one question you're going to come away with? Somebody go first.
Luke, do you need a second? Because I got one, I think. I'll just go. So I think if prefiguration is trying to bring relations or behaviors and thinking from a imagined utopia or better world into the present, bringing them into the present, then how can I, and that being like a central component of anarchism, prefiguration, how can I, and this is a pretty touchy question, I think it might get touchy, how can I make sure that my assumptions aren't like that are so enmeshed with coloniality? How can I make sure my imagined better futures are informed by decolonization, and so that what I'm trying to bring into the present is transformative and not just a kind of incremental prefiguring or incremental bettering? Yeah, how can I stay radical and still have stamina? That kind of tension point. Yeah, I think that about summarizes it.
I think for me, like, you know, it's how do we continue to build these kinds of spaces? Like, I what I went in with was expecting like intellectual conversations, which we've definitely had, and that was where it would end, and then maybe like one or two people I would meet after, and then whatever, and we'd be friends. Instead, what I got is something that I really didn't expect. There's so much for a UVic class. Like there is so much collaboration and honesty and social warmth, and like we even like bring food to feed each other. And a question for me is given the very temporary space of like a semester at UVic, like how do we keep going with these kind of projects of like assembly? And I think a lesson that I've learned, and that the anarchist community maybe still needs to learn with me as I'm still learning, is something as quote unquote niche as religion has brought a bunch of people together in a room to talk about how we want to live together in a context that is so denied and rejected and washed over with no gods, no masters. So how do we keep going? How do we renew our habits of assembly with each other? And for me, like this class has been such a bright space in my week where I'm like, oh my God, finally I actually get to talk to people and have a nice time, and it's not just some mandatory Zoom class.
And finally, Shama, what's one question as the instructor, as the I don't want to use the word leader because we're anarchists, but as the
Well,
first
actually,
citizen, if you will.
that's one of this, you know, and I'll put it as one question, but that's one of the key questions, struggles with this class. It is a class taught at UVic. It is a class that has and I try to be transparent about this, has the limitations of being institutionalized, that it's tied to UVic, which is, as I said to some students last week, this close to being the state itself. And we're talking, so how much can I sort of like, on the one hand, encourage this kind of exploration while also we're all bound by it being part of institution and contributing towards the institution. So I guess my question is around that like tension between teaching a class like this at UVic, from my position as a professor, trying to create a space where things are slightly different, but at the same time not pretending that those other limitations aren't there. And that also connects it, and on a very deep level, obviously professors teach things that they care about. Otherwise, they wouldn't be studying them, they wouldn't be teaching them, they wouldn't spend. But there's something very personal about these explorations that is very different from other classes that I teach. And one of the questions and one of the struggles going away from it is, where does this go for me? Like, where do these questions about the community that we've talked about, the relationships, the prefigurative elements, how do those transform me as a teacher, as a member of a community, and so on and so forth?
Well, I appreciate you saying on the podcast, and I appreciate all four of you being on the podcast. It was really exciting and it was really interesting. I've never spent a lot of time thinking about the interaction between religion and anarchism. And thank you for being here and for sharing your thoughts and your explorations with us. The class is Liberation Through Anarchy, a Religious Exploration, taught by Dr. Shamma Boyarin. And we've had Shamma here, as well as Luke and Chasida and Ryan, who are in the class. So to all of you, again, thank you so much for taking the time. Thanks for being on Seeds of Revolution, and have a great religiously anarchist day.
Thank you very much.
Jesus
Thank
Christ
you.
came back today,
Thank you, Joel.
like you threatened he will. Which poor group of people do you think that he would kill? And who would Jesus choose to starve if you gave him the chance? And if there was a genocide, would he take a neutral stance? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would he say it's complicated and there's sinners on both sides? Or would he say that some people, they just deserve to die? If Jesus Christ rose from the dead and on a sidewalk slept, would you extend your hand to him or just watch where you stepped? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus hate the gay folk, the queer folk, or the trans? Would he suggest they end their lives according to God's plans? Would Jesus tell a homeless man to get a fucking job, or turn his back on the poor? Would Jesus be a snob? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus build a border wall? Would Jesus drive a tank? Would Jesus be a landlord? Would Jesus run a bank? Would Jesus Christ feel safe in his skin if he came to your town? And would you still believe in him if you found out he was brown?